Alrighty, mateys. I am Michelle, Pirate Minion, and today, for this Animation Friday, I thought it would be interesting to discuss scare tactics that I think more revolve around animation as an art form, and how that sort of contrasts to how scare tactics are implemented in live action. Now, these techniques vary, but and sometimes they kind of coincide with one another, as I'm going to be explaining. But the interesting thing about animation is the freedom to do what you will with the visuals. You're not limited like in live action. So I think this really leads to some really good scare tactics that animators can use in order to create a scary effect or an eerie environment or create a sense of disturbance among children in particular. Because who doesn't want to scare those scurvy brats? So without further ado, let me discuss some of these tactics that I think are very essential when it comes to trying to scare your audience in an animated film. One thing that I've noticed about animated films that tend to be on the more scarier side is that they revolve around having some kind of transformation. You will see this in films like Snow White. You will also see this in films like Pinocchio, for that matter. They all have some kind of transformation that happens, and sort of a destructive transformation, unlike Beauty and the Beast, which has a very uplifting transformation. These transformations, I think, really do enhance the ability for the audience to get scared, because it establishes an eerie environment by slowly showcasing somebody turning into something else, somebody turning into something more uglier or more disturbing than what they were before. And this is very easy to do in animation because you don't have to rely on those pesky live action things that get in the way of making a transformation work. And that's why a lot of transformations, at least nowadays, I think are heavily CGI'd. Because transformations don't come off as effectively as they do when you're using a computer or using hand-drawn animation. And I think this is a very important part in getting your audience to get creeped out. For example, in The Princess and the Frog, even though Naveen is turning into this harmless frog, the transformation within itself still it has this creepy to it because of how they establish the transformation with, the Shadow Man basically biting him and putting in this blood that's in an amulet. The whole build up to the transformation is really what makes it very effective as a scare tactic. For example, in Snow White, when she's drinking the I don't know, I guess you could call it magic potion to turn herself ugly, you really do see how it impacts her as the transformation is occurring. So you do establish some atmosphere surrounding the transformation, and that's a lot easier to do with animation because you can create any atmosphere that you want. You don't need to rely on something called real life and real objects. You can present it however you want to present it, and I think this really demonstrates the ability for animation to really showcase itself as being scary, because if you have a very eerie transformation scene, it's really what gets the audience invested, and usually transformation scenes play a pivotal role in the story. For example, being turned into a donkey like Pinocchio, that's a pivotal part of the story that people remember. People remember Naveen being turned into a frog. People remember transformations like the Snow White or the Queen from Snow White, her transformation. Excuse me, I'm hoping I'm not developing scurvy, but regardless, that's, I think, a very important tactic that animators use, and it, I think, works really effectively when they use transformation scenes, in particular very eerie transformation scenes that really do get the audience invested into the story and what's really going on. And I think it really can capture people. In particular, I think children, because with transformations, they really get to see how somebody is becoming what they sort of are on the inside, kind of like with Snow White and with the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs film, where we see the Queen basically turning into what she really is. So again, it gives really a very visual sense for children to understand certain concepts. So I think transformations really do highlight a very scary and effective tactic to get the audience invested. The other interesting thing about animation is that usually when there are scary moments within animation, they revolve around having some buildup or some suspense associated with it. It's not as action-packed, or it's not designed to happen fairly quickly, like a lot of live action films where there's a lot of jump scares, or there's a lot of build up to a scene that revolves around being scary or revolves around some sort of suspense. Perfect example would be in Sleeping Beauty, where she is being seduced by the green ball thing that's supposed to be Maleficent, I guess. That's a perfect example because there's a lot of slow build-up leading to it, and they have the music with it that also makes it kind of eerie, and then at the same time the fairies are trying to find her, and there's this build-up, but it's not as I think intense as live action. It's intended to be a little bit more subdued, because again it's not as chaotic as live action, at least from what I could tell with animation tactics. They're usually, when it revolves around being scary, there's a sense of build up. Even with the transformations, they do kind of showcase to you the animation. They try to make it a whole scene. They don't try to, they don't try to make it really quick. They do give you a sense of atmosphere, and they do try to build the scenes up. So when something scary happens, it's usually very there's just a lot of build up to it, and there is a lot of context to it, or there's actually no context at all. Like, for example, the pink elephants on parade in Dumbo. There's absolutely no context to it, but at the end of the day, it still provides a sense of, eeriness and suspense. And again, it sort of builds up from itself to what ultimately ends up happening, because that's a perfect example, though, too, with Dumbo, because at first it's kind of like singing, a song, and then it goes into just being super duper chaotic. So again, there is this sense of buildup. There is this idea of, we're going to take our audience seriously, and we're going to gradually provide them the scare. We're not going to just have something pop out at them and scare them. Although I think again, it can be emphasized, it can be presented, I think, in animation to this pop-up scare. In particular, I think more with older animation, but I think largely as animation developed, there was this sense of trying to build up things and give a sense of eeriness and comfortableness to the audience, as opposed to just going straight into the ha, but into the R. But that's, I think, all I can really say about that particular tactic. It's just something that I've noticed over the years. So something else that's, I think, very important to note is that since animation has largely throughout history been for children, there is this idea of making things a little bit less messy. Unlike a lot of other adult live action films where things get very messy, the animated films tend to be a little bit less gory, and I think that's actually a very good thing because I personally don't like gore all that much. But it's less messy, but even though it's less messy, it's still scary because there is this, not only do you have this sense of suspense, but you can really showcase this with the visuals. For example, when Frollo's about to be killed at the end of Hunchback, you really do feel how the animation really sets up this idea of him ultimately going to the naughty place. And and it's similar with things like the Princess and the Frog with the Shadow Man, where at one point he is being taken away by the spirits because he didn't keep his promise. So, you know, it's sort of, I think, a lot of the time supposed to sort of highlight consequences, especially when you're portraying death scenes within animation. A lot of it is focused in on, you know, the evil sort of getting its karma. It's not like in live action where there's a lot of there's a lot of focus on the gore, and there's a lot of focus too on trying to make things a little bit more dimensional. Whereas with animation, there's like a clearly established, you know, karma for the bad guy to have. So I think that's something that's very is a very good tactic to have, because you can still make a death scene pretty scary. And I think over the years, animation has proven to provide some pretty gruesome death scenes, regardless of the fact that they don't have any blood or, you know, or gore, or it's not really, you know, or they do revolve some around being a little similar. They still give a different effect because of what the animators can draw and what the animators can ultimately produce. And I think that really comes off effectively when they make the death scenes not messy, just scary. And I think that comes off very effectively. So, and that kind of ties in too with sort of building up suspense, because again, usually the death scenes, they kind of take a little bit of more time, or when a death scene happens, there is some true karma associated with it. So that's, I think, something that's definitely been a good tactic that the animators have used over the years. Also, the interesting thing about animation is usually you can get villains across very effectively and making your villain pretty evil. And the reason why is because usually children's films revolve around having protagonist and antagonist. There's hardly any anti-heroes within animation. And I think for good reason, because I think it's difficult for children to really understand and grasp the concept of an anti-hero. They only know heroes and villains. And so, as a result, animation, I think, has produced some of probably the greatest villains like that I've come to know and see, because they really do give off that effect. They do know how to make a villain enjoyable to watch. And that, I think, ultimately leads to a lot of scary moments, like, when Ursula is, when she's, just throwing things in her witch pot or whatever, and she's, just enjoying singing this song. You really do feel the eeriness and the enjoyment that she gets out of it, and that's kind of scary and enjoyable at the same time. So it's kind of a scare tactic that's designed to be enjoyable for kids, and at the same time maybe creep them out a little bit. But again, it's kind of like this thing where kids like to be scared. They like to have, even though they don't want to admit that they do, they like to be scared. And I think this is having these good versus evil stories and presenting that through the way visually a villain looks compared to what a hero looks like, and sort of making those things kind of interchangeable over the years, still really, I think, establishes the effect. And again, the whole concept of, surrounding a villain with magic or giving him special powers, that's all, I think, what brings out these villains to be rather interesting, because they can showcase, how powerful they are. And power can, I think, be very intimidating for children, and in particular adults too, I'd say, as well. So again, showing the villain's power, I think, is a very good scare tactic that animators can use more effectively than in live action, because with live action, you can make a villain, intimidating and powerful, but it doesn't really come off with that same effect as with an animation, because there's just certain techniques that animators can use that showcase power more effectively, like magic, sorcery, the and it's just one of those things where there is just a lot more of there's just more from reality to play with in animation. So you can showcase power in a very creative and unique way, as opposed to live action, where usually it's either associated with money or it's associated with having some kind of weapon, or so there's a lot of other things within animation that I think animators have been able to do over the years that really impact the power and the intimidating factors that are associated with a villain. And as a result, we get a lot of scares, but at the same time, lots of enjoyment out of animation. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say about this topic in general. I think that if you enjoy being scared, animation's definitely a good place to go. If you like going back and revisiting your childhood. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say, and I hope you all have a wonderful day, week, month, and year. And I'm going to be drinking up a little something here, so yeah, I kind of would prefer to have my pint off screen, but thank you so much for watching, and cheers to everyone. Drink up, ye hearties, yo ho.